The countdown on a strike against Iran has begun after reports emerged that the Ayatollah regime is attempting to build unconventional warheads for their missiles that could carry chemicals and also biological weapons. Israeli and American officials have declared that the response will be harsh and immediate. During his meetings with President Trump at the Mar-a-Lago in Florida over the past 24 hours, Prime Minister Netanyahu seems to have received a green light for a broad campaign against Hezbollah, as well as Israel heads towards a dramatic decision amidst indications that Iran is trying to rebuild military in Syria and strengthen the Hezbollah terrorist organization in Lebanon. President Trump also said that in the Gaza Strip, a move to phase B of the ceasefire plan is imminent, and if Hamas does not disarm, it will be erased by a coalition of 59 countries. 59 countries! He also added that maybe there will be a surprise this week. And elsewhere, the Houthis in Yemen are rebuilding their strength and training for the next round amidst a general Iranian buildup of its regional proxies. So, what can be seen about the future of the Middle East following this historic meeting in Florida between President Trump and his senior advisors and the Israeli delegation led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host Yair Pinto, bringing you all the truth about what is happening in Israel. The historic Trump-Netanyahu meeting at the Mar-a-Lago took place on Monday evening, Israel time, and by the time it was over, the equation in the Middle East has shifted sharply. TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will bring us an in-depth look at what all the statements mean for the future of the Middle East, starting with Hamas and the demand that it disarm, and what will happen if they continue to refuse. But the really big story is that after the summit and the meeting, it appears that the United States gave a green light to Israel for a strike on Iran. We'll be talking about that a lot more in this report. Other details emerged from the meeting included a renewed call by President Trump for Israeli President Yitzhak Herzog to pardon Netanyahu, and a vague statement by President Trump that maybe there will be surprises by the new year. He didn't specify exactly what surprises might be coming, but he added that he is considering selling F-35s to Turkey, saying that Erdogan is my friend. Bibi respects him. This last statement drew sharp look from Netanyahu, so maybe that was one of the surprises that President Trump was talking about. But President Trump also spoke about other relationships that he'd like to see Israel having with its neighbors, saying that I'm sure Syria and Israel will work it out. And regarding Hamas, he declared that they will get a short time to disarm. If not, it will be terrible. In regards to Hezbollah, he said, they are behaving badly, which, with all due respect to the president, seems to be like a very severe underestimate. But maybe that was the point. In any case, we'll have the full details about this historic meeting, as well as a closer look at Iran's preparations for an alternative deterrent to the Iranian nuclear program that suffered a severe blow in the war against Israel and the United States. Military sources claim that the Revolutionary Guards are escalating the development of chemical and also biological warheads for long-range ballistic missiles as part of preparations for a possible confrontation with Israel and with the United States of America, and against the backdrop of escalating regional tensions. At the same time, this week, we're seeing chaos on the streets of Iranian cities as large numbers of protesters clash with security forces and demand that the regime pay attention to their economic needs. We'll be talking a lot about Iran in today's report, because there is a lot going on there this week that affects us here in Israel, for better and also for worse. But getting back to President Trump, he also addressed the situation in Syria, declared his support for interim President Abu Muhammad al-Julani, and emphasized the need to strengthen his stability against ISIS attempts to destabilize the region. Once again, Iran emerged as the leading cause of instability in Syria together with ISIS. After suffering a severe blow with Assad's fall, the Ayatollah regime is trying to rebuild its military power inside Syria. According to the report, the Revolutionary Guards positioned a large number of soldiers on the Syrian border, and they can move in and try to take over the country with very little warning. Back home in Israel, the government has begun a process to revoke operating licenses from several international aid organizations in Judea and Samaria and in the Gaza Strip that employed terrorists. Finally, there was shock this week amongst the British Jews after the state held a reception for an Islamic activist who has openly called for the murder of Zionists. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, with me is Shoshani, and this is your Boots on the Ground reporting about everything that's happening in Israel on this 815th day of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are operating under the control of the Revolutionary Guards Corps in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. A moment before we begin, I want to invite you to click on the subscribe button so that you stay tuned to the truth in real time and you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now, with that in mind, I'm letting you know in advance that throughout today's report, we will be mentioning Iran many times because the Islamic Republic is involved in almost every attack coming against Israel from all angles and in every arena. So to start with, right now, it seems that Iran is trying to rebuild the proxy organizations against Israel in order to take revenge for the humiliating defeat in the 12-day war in June. However, they're only setting themselves up for another humiliating defeat, and this time, it will be even more catastrophic for them. So hold on tight as we take a deep dive into this strategic story about Iran's pointless obsession with Israel and the disaster it is racing towards in full speed for itself and its people. So reports emerged on Monday that the opposition news portal Iran International, that military sources familiar with the details believe that Iran's Revolutionary Guards are working to develop chemical and also biological warheads intended for long-range ballistic missiles. According to the sources, the efforts are being held by the Revolutionary Guards Aerospace Force alongside the transfer of missile launchers to areas in eastern Iran. Last week, Iran International reported that Western intelligence agencies identified unusual activity by the Revolutionary Guards Aerospace Force and increased monitoring and oversight. According to the sources, the monitoring includes tracking, command and control signals, as well as deployment movements and logistics that are related to these forces. According to the report, the plans include adapting and optimizing ballistic missiles to carry chemical and biological materials, alongside upgrading the accompanying command and control systems. One source defined the capabilities being built as a complementary deterrence factor intended to operate alongside Iran's conventional missile program as part of preparations for large-scale conflict scenarios. It's worth pointing out that the pursuit of chemical weapons, but also biological warheads, is taking place about half a year after Iran's foreign minister described his country as the biggest victim of chemical weapons in modern times, when he mentioned Saddam Hussein's mustard gas attack on the city of Sardishat in western Iran in 1987. When asked about the contradiction between the statements and the reported activity, one of the sources said that Iran's leadership views the possibility of an Israeli or an American strike as an existential threat and intends, in the case of a confrontation, to significantly raise the price for the other side. Military analysts quoted in the report said that if the reports are verified, the development of chemical and also biological warheads could dramatically change the balance of deterrence in the Middle East and lead to broad international reactions. The deployment of such weapons is expected to trigger global condemnations and pave the way for additional sanctions and increased pressure on Tehran. This would likely include condemnations even from Iran's allies in Russia and in China, although I'm sure that the North Koreans would not raise serious objections, so Iran still would have one friend in the entire world. However, North Korea is far away from Iran, and the regime has big problems much closer at home. In fact, they've got huge problems inside their own country. Large-scale protests against the terrible economic situation have once again broken out in the streets of Iranian cities, including the capital, Tehran, where protests have clashed with security forces amidst the growing chaos. The complaints of the protests includes the catastrophic devaluation of the Iranian currency, the rial, which this week fell in value to point where it's 1.4 million rials for one United States dollar. That makes ordinary commerce impossible, and so large numbers of shop owners are closing up and pouring into the streets to demand that the regime do something about it. Even the Grand Bazaar in Tehran has shut down, an unusual warning sign for the entire regime in Iran. President Pezeshkian, to his credit, has called on the regime to listen to the legitimate demands of the protesters as fears grow that the economic collapse will turn into a broad popular awakening. If the people have nothing left to lose, they might be willing to risk massive violence by the regime's security forces in order to try to force some kind of change. However, the regime has never cared about the ordinary people of Iran, and is continuing its long-lasting policy of focusing all its efforts and all its resources on feeding its obsession against Israel and also against the West. So, now, this is a very good place to tell you about our partner for today's video, because here in Israel, there are also great needs, but there are also people who care about these needs and are working hard to help the people that are struggling in this difficult situation. So as 2025 comes to a close, the need in Israel is still great. War doesn't end when the sirens stop. Families are still rebuilding. Reservists are still serving in the IDF. Survivors still face long days alone, and children still go to bed hungry. That's why Meir Panim does what it does best, calling its work Hitchadshut, which means in Hebrew, renewal. It begins quietly with a fridge that hums again, a backpack packed for school for a child, a Holocaust survivor smiling over a hot soup. This year, Meir Panim helped 100,000 displaced families rebuild their lives. They served 2.6 million meals, supported over 100,000 IDF soldiers, delivered 500,000 care packages, and renovated hundreds of homes for families and for Holocaust survivors in need. Across Israel, light is returning in small ways. Each meal, each visit, each act of kindness is part of rebuilding steady ground under the feet of Israeli men, women, and children. So this end of this year, you can help bring renewal to those that are still struggling. Visit bless-israel.org and give now. Again, that's bless-israel.org and give now. Every donation is tax deductible, and every gift helps light another small flame of hope in Israel. Now, getting back into the news and circling back to the subject of Iran's pursuit of chemical and also biological weapons capability, this should be seen as a stopgap measure. The real goal is to create fear in Israel that if they are attacked, they can respond with these unconventional weapons. And this will give the regime in Iran time to race for nuclear weapons without fear of United States or Israeli strikes against them. Moving the ballistic missile launchers to eastern Iran will also greatly challenge the Israeli Air Force's ability to strike them and will enable the creation of a credible threat. However, it will also make it more difficult for the Iranians to fire their missiles at Israel because of the great distance. So, what did President Trump say about Iran? TBN Israel senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will give us a closer look at the president's statements and what they mean for Israel and also for the broader Middle East. The general line says that either Iran will reach a new and good nuclear agreement that will also include the issue of ballistic missiles and a cessation of regional subversion, or the United States and Israel will move together to hit Iran once more. Much harder this time in order to convince them to stop their moves against Israel and against the American interests in this region. So here at TBN Israel, we are working during these last holiday period time, day after day, to bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel and in this region, because because the situation didn't take a holiday break. Our enemies do not stop, and we need to share the truth because we need your help in praying for the situation. So let's continue. And now, we'll be shifting our focus to the Gaza Strip, where the Hamas terrorist organization is refusing to disarm, fighting for its life in the streets of the Gaza Strip area against forces that want something different for the future of the Palestinians in Gaza. The organization's leadership took a hard blow in this war, as senior figures were eliminated, including the legendary spokesperson Abu Obeida, and Hamas was forced to publicly admit that the IDF already announced 4 months ago an intelligence image of Hamas's defeat. On the ground, Hamas is a shadow of its former self, as most of the military and the rocket infrastructure was hit, production collapsed, at least half of the Gaza Strip is not under Hamas's control, and it struggles to provide food, shelter, and healthcare to millions of Gazans. The recent winter storm that we had in Israel hit Gaza very hard, with massive flooding, wind, and cold temperatures, and Hamas had no answer to any of this. So despite this, the organization continues to act as the ruler, opening police stations, taking over humanitarian aid, and developing new weapons from the explosive materials of unexploded ordnance, and keeping it in its hands the small arms, the anti-tank weapons, and the machine guns that they still have. Hamas talks about resistance and about liberation, but on the Gazan Strip, the legitimacy today is measured by the ability to guarantee life, not slogans. And meanwhile, in Jerusalem, security officials warn that without a complete dismantling of Hamas as an army and as a military power, but also as a government, and without demilitarizing the Gaza Strip infrastructures, the next massacre is only a question of time. In the background, the world is starting to align behind a statement that President Trump made yesterday, saying that if Hamas does not disarm, it will be terrible for them, as there are 59 countries that want to erase Hamas because it's the right thing to do. And now, we're once again talking about President Trump, and so it's time to move to TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani, who will take us into an in-depth analysis of what was actually agreed yesterday in the meeting between Trump and Netanyahu, and how this is going to change the Middle East. So after Mati's analysis, it's worth staying with us because we will give you a deep background on the fact that the IDF is preparing for an offensive posture against Hezbollah in Lebanon, but Mati spent most of last night going through all the information that came out of the meeting between Trump and Netanyahu, and I'm eager to hear what he has to say. So Mati, in an era which President Trump talks about surprises, gives a green light to strike Iran, threatens that 59 countries will erase Hamas, hints of dismantling Hezbollah, and tries to connect between Israel and Turkey, Syria, and other countries, the question is the Middle East heading towards eliminating terror states and deepening the Abraham Accords, or only towards a reshaping of the same threats in new masks? So Mati, just tell us what's happening.
The Trump-Netanyahu meeting in Mar-a-Lago was not a photo op. It was not just to keep the semblance of movement forward. It was yet another step in rearranging, reshuffling, restructuring the power balance in the Middle East, with a huge emphasis on knocking into action dramatic changes that are going to happen before the new year. Yes, you heard me right. Israeli news outlets are reporting that there's some big announcements that are coming even in the next 2 days before this year, before 2025 is over. On the table, the biggest topic of all is, of course, what is going to happen in the Gaza Strip and the removal of Hamas. President Trump comes out with some very bold statements in this meeting, saying that he expects very quick or very rapid changes to take place in the Gaza Strip, specifically as it relates to disarming the Hamas organization. And he makes a threat that's quite clear. He says, Hamas, if you don't disarm quickly, he doesn't define what quickly is, he says, we're going to have 59 countries, where he's alluding to the number of countries that are part of this, let's call it regional alliance that he's pulling together, 59 countries that will descend on Hamas to push forward this change. So what does this mean? How is this going to change everything that's happening? How are we moving into the new year as it relates to Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria? And specifically, what does this mean the meeting between Netanyahu and Trump in Mar-a-Lago, what does it mean for this region? Let's take a couple minutes and break it all down. A main point in the Trump and Netanyahu meeting was the question of moving into Stage B for the Gaza Strip. Stage B, of course, is the disarmament and removal of Hamas, both from civil governance and, of course, removing their weapons. This has been a huge question that's been on the table for a very long time. Trump moves this forward on several different levels. One, he publicly appoints Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who have been his emissaries and let's call it special envoys to the Middle East on many different projects, and have shown, in my opinion, a very substantial ability to bring change and move things rapidly forward in recent months. The ceasefire was in part their involvement. The Saudis, the Qataris, there's been a lot that they've been doing behind the scenes and on scenes that has been very, very significant. But the main question, the main point of who is actually the entity that removes Hamas has not yet been fully answered. Trump says the US will be responsible for it, but at the same time is expecting Israel to start gradually withdrawing behind the yellow line that we currently hold, and Hamas to disarm at the same time. But up till now, Israel has made it very, very clear that we can't do that without Hamas being disarmed. This has sort of been the key point, the pivotal point that has been holding and delaying this project for a very, very long time. So here's what's going to happen. Israel and the US have talked repeatedly, we reported on this in recent days, about the fact that there'll be a gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces and that Hamas will slowly be disarmed. But in reality, what's really happening on the ground is that the technocrat part of the government is the one that's kicking into action. Let me explain this. There's a coalition that's already working in southern Israel to deliver, to perform, to hand over, let's call it the humanitarian, the civil governance, the technocrat, bureaucrat government that's supposed to be made up of Palestinian representatives. That's already, for the most part, set up. It's not in place, but the structure for that, the logistics for that, the manpower for that, the planning for that, the day after that's going to look at rebuilding the Gaza Strip on every possible level, from hospitals to schools to engineering work to roads, etc. All of that is already in motion. It's just been waiting on the key military part. And what has been discussed in recent days, even prior to this meeting between Trump and Netanyahu, is the fact that we might just start seeing it happen gradually. As in, where Israel controls, we'll see that technocrat government move in, and somehow, somewhere, in some mechanism, Hamas will be slowly disarmed and removed from civil governance over the Gaza Strip. But there's a key point here that can't be left untouched. And that's the emotional part. That's the symbolic part of returning the last hostage. Let me give that man a name. The man's name is Ran or Rani Gvili. I interviewed his uncle. His family just met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who said that he's going to be part of every deal. And the Israeli government has been abundantly clear and supported by the American government in saying that every deal includes the return of the last hostage. Rani Gvili, he's a hero of Israel. He's a man who single-handedly fought and eliminated dozens of terrorists on the 7th of October and was taken injured into the Gaza Strip, last seen on that day of October 7th. Now, there's been intel about him, but we still can't move on and don't want to move on without that last hostage being returned. So let's summarize up till now. The main issue remains on the table, which is the Gaza Strip in the day after and who's going to replace. And where it seems we're going the gradual process, or what we like calling in Israel the salami process. One bit at a time, we're starting to bite away at the problem that is, how do we rebuild the Gaza Strip and eliminate Hamas? Right now, the civil governance is able to start taking action in the Gaza Strip. I'm not saying it is. It's able to take action. That's a coalition of both American and many other countries that's already present and on the ground in southern Israel, waiting for the get-go or the green light to move into the Gaza Strip and start rebuilding. And they might just start doing that as we look at early January in the areas controlled by Israel, everything behind the yellow line in the Gaza Strip. So in most of the eastern areas of the Gaza area, but not in the city centers that are close to the coastal area in Gaza. That's the summary of that part of the conversation. But the Trump and Netanyahu conversation doesn't start and end with Gaza. It's about a regional shift. The big piece on the table is Lebanon. Lebanon has been a country that has received a lot of help, both officially and unofficially, from the US and multiple other countries, all geared at helping them fight off and kick out Hezbollah from the country of Lebanon. To make history very, very short, Lebanon has been a country that's been destabilized by, let's call it, radical Islamic violence for decades at this point, and it has dramatically affected their demographics, their political and financial stability as a country. And the move made by the US and other allies has been an attempt to rebuild Lebanon as a country that's able to fight off Hezbollah, not to have Israel necessarily, or the US have to fight off Hezbollah terrorists. To help Lebanon do that, Israel and the US have been active inside Syria, and I'll explain why that's relevant in a second, inside Syria in preventing goods, that is weaponry and cash, from entering into Lebanon, and thus trying to cut off the supply chain from the Iranian overlords through Iraq, Syria, and into Lebanon. But that isn't enough. Lebanon, the government of Lebanon and the Lebanese army need to take much more significant action in removing Hezbollah from their country. And both Israel and the United States are in agreement and alignment about the fact that they simply haven't done that. So what do we see next on this topic? We see additional pressure, both from Israel and from the US on Lebanon. We probably see more assets on the ground on both sides, and a substantial squeeze both on Hezbollah inside Lebanon from the Israeli troops that are in southern Lebanon, and from the American and their allies on the political echelon of the Lebanese government, all in an attempt to stabilize that region too. And if you break down the macro picture here, it's very clear why this is happening. Between Gaza, Lebanon, Syria to a lesser degree, and of course other parts of this region, they've all fallen under, over recent years, the tentacles, the negative effect of the proxy doctrine of the Iranian government, where they're trying to use other countries to destabilize and harm Israel and to sow fear in the hearts of people around the world. And this move, this sweeping move that the Trump White House is carrying out, is all aimed at trying to rebuild this region without Iranian influence. A major topic discussed in this meeting between Trump and Netanyahu was a question of Syria. And it shows you something very interesting. It shows you that President Trump is able and willing to work with a very problematic ally, such as Ashara, the leader of Syria, in trying to stabilize this region. And it's understandable. The Trump leadership, or the Trump White House, is incredibly pragmatic in its approach to who the leaders are. And I'll get to this in a second when we talk about Turkey. They're able to look at a country and say, look, this is the best we have right now in this region, and we're willing to work with it. We understand it's not perfect. We understand this person has a very problematic background, and he does have a very problematic background, but that's not going to stop us from trying to stabilize this region. And in that, Israel and the United States are aligned. We both want to see Syria stabilized. This is a country that for most of my life was a sworn enemy of the state of Israel. And to be anywhere removed from that, anywhere where we see Syria stepping closer to be an ally of the United States, that's good news for Israel. And I want to tell you something else. That's also good news for the people of Syria. Stability and rebuilding is exactly what that country needs after a very extended civil war, and before that, several generations, not decades, several generations of dictatorial leadership by the Assad family. So this is good news for the people of Syria, good news for the people of Israel, and it shows you how deep, how methodical the Trump plan for the Middle East is actually going. And that brings us to the next question. That big question is, well, what about Judea and Samaria? In every discussion that takes place about Gaza, about Lebanon, about Syria, we forgot to talk about the big question, which is within the boundaries of what we call proper Israel, in Judea and Samaria, there's a very substantial Palestinian population that lives under the Palestinian Authority, with which Israel has a very, and this is an understatement, very problematic relationship. In fact, I right now am in reserves. That's why I'm wearing this green outfit, exactly for that reason, because we have a very problematic security situation in Judea and Samaria. So what does that look like? I mean, every conversation that has to do with rebuilding this region, specifically when we talk about Qatar and the Saudis, they'll always bring up the topic of, well, what about the Palestinians? What about the Israel-Palestinian issue? And also there, Trump is full of surprises in his meeting with Netanyahu. He says a couple things. First of all, he gives Netanyahu a huge amount of credit for holding security or carrying the security of the state of Israel. And he does this also on a personal level. He says, Bibi is to be respected. Bibi is to be recognized for what he did for safeguarding the people of Israel. But he also says that he believes that they have some creative solutions to what's going to happen in Judea and Samaria. I want to remind you that one of the original points of the Trump then 23, 21, and now 20-point plan was to have a series of reforms that will take place in the Palestinian Authority, which is an organization marred by many, many decades of incidents of corruption and misuse of funds again and again and again, both for terrorism but also just for personal gain. Now, there's been conversation of carrying out reforms within the Palestinian Authority, and we might just see, and Trump has alluded to this, and we've heard some behind-the-scenes leaks on this topic. Trump has alluded to the fact we might hear some very surprising reports on what's going to happen with the Palestinian Authority as we move forward in this region, in this question of rebuilding American influence and the Israeli relationship to our neighbors in this region. I want to remind you that one of the original thoughts as it related to that technocrat government in the Gaza Strip was leaders appointed by the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah from the Abu Mazen government. So again, there's definitely conversation happening behind the scenes here, and it's very significant because any regional reshaping, especially when it comes to Abraham Accords 2.0 and the Saudi question, that all has to tie in a greater Palestinian solution. It has to have some kind of more than symbolic, let's call it a proper, on-the-ground, real change in the relationship with the Palestinian Authority and the question of how Israel engages with them. And we might just see some very surprising headlines on that topic. But we're not done with the surprises. Yet another surprising comment that came out is comments about the Turkish government and specifically their president, Erdogan. Let me remind you just in a second that Israel is strongly opposed to any Turkish presence on our borders, be it via Lebanon, Syria, or in the Gaza Strip. And Turkey is very, very, very strongly trying to get a foothold in what's happening in this region. And here in this press conference, Trump says some interesting things. He says to Bibi and to the public, he says, look, I know how to manage Erdogan. And not only that, I think me, Bibi, and Erdogan, we're going to figure something out. This is, of course, paraphrasing of what he exactly said. He says, I think we're going to work this out. And what he's alluding to is he thinks he's going to be able to control Turkish interests and actions and veer them towards something that is effective and helpful for both Israel and the United States in the rebuilding of this region. That's tricky for Israel on multiple accounts. The main one being is that from Israel's perspective, any leeway that we give the Turkish government always results in them being closer to our borders and being a problem that we have to deal with. And we're actively looking at distancing ourselves from them and pushing them away from us. This isn't the episode to talk about this, but we have other business or unfinished business with the Turkish government that has to do with our trade deals and export of natural gas in this region against the interest of the Turkish government. So this is a complicated relationship, and I'm not sure that that's resolved by this meeting. In fact, I'm sure that there's going to be a lot more conversation on this topic because a superpower such as the Turkish government, well, their problem isn't going to be resolved anytime soon. Definitely not just by saying we think it needs to be 1, 2, 3, 4. We think we can deal with him, etc. And then, of course, always the elephant in the room, the Islamic Republic of Iran. They're always behind the scenes, something that needs to be taken into account. And also here, the Trump White House has some very interesting things to say. In the meeting between Trump and Netanyahu, they say clearly, look, if Iran goes back to actively pursuing a nuclear military project, which they were in the past, we're going after them. And it was made public that in the case that such evidence surfaces, the United States, together with Israel, is going to carry out something similar to what happened in Operation Midnight Hammer back in June of this year. I don't think it's off the table for that to happen in the foreseeable future, but I think many of the speculations that I've been hearing in recent weeks about it happening almost immediately, I think they're a little far-fetched. We're not there yet, but Trump makes very, very clear to the Iranians, we're watching you, we're keeping track of what you're doing, and we're going to come after you in the event that you try to pursue a nuclear program once more. So let's wrap this up. Trump and Netanyahu meet in the White House. Their meeting is significant and historic, not because it changes everything, but because it pushes everything forward. It shows the commitment of the United States to rebuild the Gaza Strip and to work hand in hand with the Israelis and to clear away not only from the headlines, but actually stick to pragmatic solutions on the ground. They're putting in the people, Witkoff, Kushner, they're putting in the assets, the funds, the energy, the diplomatic pressure that's really needed to reshape the Gaza Strip. What we're looking at now is probably going to be a staggered solution, but it's still a solution, even if it's only halfway, even if it's only partial. And then there's another part. We're still talking about the regional change. The regional change that is, of course, stabilizing Lebanon, stabilizing Syria, and keeping the Iranian government at bay and away from the Middle East. This is good news for Israel. This shows the commitment of the U.S. government to a strong and close relationship with the Israeli government, regardless of who's in the White House and who's in the Israeli Prime Minister's seat. But especially now between Netanyahu and Trump, there's a clear alliance that is very, very easy to see, and a true alignment of interests between the two governments. And as we enter into this new year, I think we're going to continue hearing surprising news on the ground. And sooner than we expect, we're going to start to see things changing on the Gaza Strip, on the ground, and in the diplomatic arena around us in this region. So if I don't get to see you guys again, let this be a new year, a happy new year to all of you, and a better year for the people of Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and of course, for the people of Israel. Now back to Yair Pinto.
So thank you very much, Mati Shoshani, for putting things in order as diplomacy continues that can change the picture for all of us here in the Middle East. And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to spread the truth. And 1 second before we continue to discuss what's happening with the disarmament of Hezbollah in Lebanon, I want to call on you to help us spread the truth by hitting the subscribe button and sharing these videos with as many people as possible. And now, we're moving on to the news from Israel's northern front. There are no guns firing in the north right now, but no one should think that this is real peace and quiet. Under the radar, a race against time is on its way amidst efforts by the Lebanese National Army with support from America, France, to disarm Hezbollah versus an Iranian attempt to rebuild the terrorist organization, bypass American pressure, and reopen for itself a breathing corridor through the underground spaces of southeastern Syria. The American deadline for disarming Hezbollah is the last day of 2025, which is tomorrow, by the way, Wednesday. No one seriously expects that this deadline will be met, and in Jerusalem they understand what that means. If Hezbollah refuses to disarm, the next chapter in this tragic story is already written. Therefore, Prime Minister Netanyahu came to his meeting with President Trump with the north of Israel at the top of the priorities, including a demand for real dismantling of the organization's assets and the American backing for a renewed IDF ground operation in Lebanon if the commitments collapse. Trump himself did not hide the picture, saying that the Lebanese government is at a devastated situation against Hezbollah, and Hezbollah are behaving badly, and we'll see what happens. This is a statement that explains the problem precisely, that we're looking at a weak state versus a terror army. But the bigger story is, once again, Tehran. After the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, which was a severe blow to the Iranian axis, Iran did not disappear. It is simply changing its methods. According to reports from Syria, the Revolutionary Guards have been working since early December to re-recruit remnants of the Assad regime militias, including men from the 4th Division and military intelligence. Officers have in recent months been held in facilities and camps on the Iraqi border, in the El Hermel area in Lebanon, and in areas under Kurdish control in the eastern Syrian side. This is all with the goal of bringing them back into the field and igniting a new wave of security clashes. So the goal of all of this activity is to divert American attention from the pressure to dismantle militias in Iraq, is the pressure to disarm Hezbollah and grant Tehran and Hezbollah freedom of maneuver, both against the threat of an Israeli strike and for intelligence gathering against Israel. At the same time, Israel and the United States have identified attempts by ISIS to recover against the background of the weakness in Syrian governance and internal tensions around the leadership of interim President Abu Muhammad al-Julani. So President Trump had something to say about all of this when he spoke to the media after his meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu on Monday, and he declared that a strong president is what Syria needs. You cannot put a perfect person, and we will get along with him great. I'm sure that Israel and Syria will get along great. I will make sure that they get along. We have an understanding regarding Syria. For Jerusalem, this is not an image that is bringing assurance and security, but Netanyahu defined the objective in simple words. Our interest is that there will be a border of peace between Syria and Israel. We want to make sure that the border next to us is safe without terrorists. And furthermore, on the ground, the test is not the headlines, but who controls the space. The United States already struck ISIS targets in Syria earlier this month, and this is after a deadly ambush of US personnel, and the IDF also operated against ISIS in southern Syria, arresting an operative of the terrorist organization and transferring him for interrogation in Israel. The shared conclusion of the American and also the Israeli officials is that the new government in Syria must be strengthened to prevent a power vacuum and ungoverned spaces, because that's exactly what Iran needs to move forward with its own plans and its own agendas. But that raises another very, very serious question, because if Iran succeeds in reigniting Syria to save Hezbollah, and if Lebanon remains at a disadvantage against it, are we on the way to an arrangement that stabilizes the northern border, or to another round of fighting with no one to predict how it might end or what it might look like? One thing that you can be absolutely certain of, and that is that here at TBN Israel, we will tell you the truth of what's happening on the ground in Israel every single day. So stay tuned, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And now we're switching our focus once again to the threat from the Houthis in Yemen. They haven't fired any ballistic missiles at Israel for several months now, but they didn't disappear. They're rebuilding their power. And once again, it's Iran which took blows on other arenas and is now holding the Houthis like a card. They are waiting for the right moment to play against Israel. Since the ceasefire in Gaza in October, Israeli officials have warned that the Houthis accelerated the rebuilding of their military array with more production, more drills, and more readiness. According to assessments by security officials, missile and UAV production in Yemen is accelerating with Iranian assistance as part of preparations for a day of command. The main concern is that Iran will transfer ballistic missiles and more advanced UAVs to the Houthis, which will shorten the path to a direct and significant threat to Israel exactly at the moment when attention shifts north to Lebanon, or if the agreement in Gaza collapses. So reports in Yemen indicate that on the ground the Houthis continue with training maneuvers and armed gatherings almost every single day. Drills take place in different provinces alongside tribal marches with weapons and hashtags like ready for the next round or multiply on social media. So their message is not meant only for Israel, but also internally towards the other Yemeni people, to show that they are still the governing power, still in control, still the arm capable of setting the region on fire when they decide. In this context, Israel's decisions this week to extend diplomatic recognition to the state of Somaliland is highly relevant. This diplomatic move by Israel set off a wave of condemnations from all over the world, and even an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council. So I'm personally astonished by all of this, because there are literally dozens of situations all over the world this week, including an active shooting war between Thailand and Cambodia, and aggressive Chinese military maneuvers all around Taiwan that the United Nations Security Council is not holding any emergency meeting over. But somehow, Israel recognizing Somaliland as a country is worthy of their attention? For the Houthis, Israeli recognition of Somaliland became one of the most meaningful events, because it is an argument that allows them to present Israel as trying to reshape the Middle East and seek a foothold at the gates of the Red Sea, as if that is something only that they are allowed to do. The Houthi leader, Abdel Malik al-Houthi, issued a direct threat that places the area on a military map, saying any Israeli presence in the Somaliland area is a legitimate military target for our forces. And in additional reports, the message was handed over even more. It was hardened when they say that Israel is a danger to the entire region. Obviously, Israel sees this differently, declaring that it is fear that is motivating the Houthi-Iran alliance to make a big deal out of all of the situation. This alliance feels that Israel could use Somaliland as an observation point and possible jumping off point that shortens distances to Yemen and enables more precise airstrikes against strategic Houthi targets and also Iran's. And with that in mind, Israeli intelligence officials say that the Houthi and the Iranian threats are not only propaganda, they are an attempt to draw a red line in advance. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said last week, our account with the Houthis in Yemen is still not closed, and of course, with Iran itself. For that matter, the Houthis have an account of their own after the airstrike attributed to Israel in Operation Tipat Mazal in August, in which the regime's top leadership was completely eliminated. Since then, they are waiting for an opportunity to strike back, and Israeli officials assess that the Houthis will seek to return to attacks the moment that the IDF goes out for a big operation against Hezbollah in Lebanon or in the ceasefire in Gaza, in case it collapses. So just a moment ago, I mentioned the United Nations, and the news from them is not all bad. In November, the Security Council renewed sanctions on the Houthis, including asset freezes and also travel bans, extending the work of an expert team until the end of 2026. The option to expand sanctions against those involved in cross-border and maritime attacks and expanding cargo inspections also in open waters. But security officials assess that sanctions alone do not deter the Houthis and may even trigger an aggressive response, because without real pressure on the ground, the Houthis know how to turn decisions meant to deter them into engines of incitement and recruitment. Beyond that, since the end of the 2023, they have already proven their military capabilities, firing hundreds of ballistic missiles against Israel and firing anti-ship missiles at commercial ships and warships in the Red Sea, the Gulf of Eden, and the Bab el-Mandab Straits. They did all of this under the banner of assisting Gaza. Now, as they train for the next round and raise their head against a background of internal friction in Yemen, the real question is not whether they want to return to active hostilities, but when Iran will decide the moment has arrived. So when we look at the empty skies above Eilat, a southern city in Israel, and at the sea that seems calm, we must ask ourselves if this is the quiet of the end of the round or the quiet before a new Iranian card is being pulled out for Yemen, exactly when the next campaign opens in the north. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think that Iran is planning a multi-directional attack against Israel from the north and from Yemen? I'm curious to see what you have to say. Nothing is certain, except for one thing. Here at TBN Israel, we will keep reporting every day about what's happening on the ground. So keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. And most importantly, don't forget to tell a friend, tell your neighbor, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. It just helps us to share the truth when there are so many lies going around. Just talking about lies, misinformation, and propaganda, just take a look at what happened in British this week, as British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, and Foreign Secretary David Lammy publicly welcomed the return to London of Alaa Abdel Fattah, an Egyptian British activist who was recently released from prison in Egypt. He arrived Friday evening after Egypt removed the travel ban imposed on him, which was the result, according to reports, of British diplomatic pressure, and Starmer defined the handling of this case as a top priority. But immediately, a storm erupted as Jewish organizations and opposition politicians pointed to a series on his old posts on social media networks, in which he was describing the killing of Zionists, including civilians, as a heroic act, wrote that one should kill more of them, denied the Holocaust, expressed support for Osama bin Laden, and called for harming Americans and police officers. Many people in the United Kingdom are asking, how can a government welcome a man with a history of violent incitement and blatant hatred towards Jews and towards Israel? In the Jewish community, there are calls to re-examine his British citizenship that was granted to him in 2021, and some argue that he should have been detained already upon landing in the country. For his part, Abdel Fattah claims that the tweets were taken out of context and were written in private conversation during wartime. What do you think about this? Let me know in the comments. I say that we will pray together for the people of Israel and also for the situation in the United Kingdom. So help us spread the truth. Remember, this is a spiritual war. And keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem, for the children of Israel, for the IDF, and for our leaders to have wisdom. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem. I'll see you again tomorrow. And stay with me for just 1 minute for a sneak peek behind the scenes as I'm gonna go into one of these tanks together with you. Okay? Let's do this. So, this is a very, very old tank. It was used by Israel in the 1967 war against Jordan here in the mountain of Har Adar. It's not just an area in Judea and Samaria, and not far from Jerusalem. Where I am sitting right here is where the driver sits. Let me show you all around. Here is where the gunner sits. This is the cannon. Here you have a hole for another machine gun. The commander is standing here with his head outside. As you can see, pretty claustrophobic. I spent more than 5 years in these tanks. And one of the reasons I decided to upgrade from a gunner to being a commander and then a platoon commander was that you can stand. So I'm pretty tall, so you don't need to be seated inside all the time. Okay, that's all for today. Hope you enjoyed our tour in an old tank. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem and stand with Israel. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us. Thanks. Bye.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.